She's the Walter Scott Presidential Chair in Energy, Environment, and Health at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. Her research has connected combustion with atmospheric chemistry and climate, with technology change and exploration of the implications of possible future emission scenarios. She also examines the relationship between technology options and human choice. Her work spans considerations as small as the composition of a particle in the atmosphere and as large as the national transportation system in the quest to characterize the dance between humans, their energy use, and the atmospheric climate. And I'd like to say that she's made some of the only measurements of soot particles, smoke coming off of brick kilns in India, which is one of the things I'm eager to talk with her more about later. Dr. Bond obtained her bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Washington and from Berkeley. She then earned her interdisciplinary PhD back at the University of Washington and was a NOAA Climate and Global Change postdoc at NOAA in Seattle. She came to Colorado State University in 2019 after 16 years as a professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She's published over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles, has testified in Congress, and has been honored with a collection of prestigious awards, including being a fellow of the American Geophysical Union and a 2014 John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Fellow, otherwise known as the MacArthur Genius Award. So thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to your talk, Henry.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Wow, thanks for being here. So many people. So I am going to start by saying how I got to where I am and what I'm going to talk about today, because I think when I knew Dr. Mazeral, I was 100% atmospheric chemistry and emissions, and now I'm completely not. And so when people invite me to talk, they think I'm going to talk about black carbon, and I haven't actually done that in 10-ish years. And so for those of you who are looking at paths to follow, don't do what I did. It takes a long time and it's troublesome, but also a little bit about how what I think is important and worth focusing on has shifted over the years. Again, not to say that anything is unimportant, but one thing leads you to another. And so then my second topic is searching for what I call the middle range. And to me, that's a fairly undefined space. So I'll tell you what that is. I'm going to talk about, I promise to talk about heterogeneous humans at home. One thing I can say is that it's really hard to model heterogeneity, and my model is still very bad. So I have just a smattering of results, but I especially want to emphasize decision rules, which I think of as a structure for what I'm looking for in the middle range. And then finally, 6 ideas on the pace of change. I think people want to change fast, and I'm not sure we're going to. It's not depressing. And so I just want to talk about pace as a thing to think about and how I think about it. So what am I doing here? Not what am I doing at Princeton, what am I doing in this space of transitions in the home? So a long time ago, I was working on black carbon. I published a super long paper. This figure is the signature figure from that paper. It was not developed by me, like most of my work. But we looked at everything and tried to quantify everything. And so for those of you who are not atmospheric chemists, black carbon is atmospheric aerosol emitted from incomplete combustion. Video man, am I bothering you if I wander around? Sorry. Okay. So that's what I was doing. And so the general idea is black carbon is a small heater that stays in the atmosphere for a very short period of time, like a week. And so if you turn it off, then it goes out of the atmosphere and the atmosphere stops warming. Meanwhile, we're stuck with this CO2 that we can't seem to get rid of. We keep putting in the atmosphere because we like to fly and drive and do a lot of other things, and we need to deal with that. But we're also doing other things to the atmosphere. So maybe we could turn off black carbon and ozone and the other short-lived climate forcers and slow down the rate of climate change. And that sounded great when we were thinking that it took only a week. And at some point, I realized I'd been doing it for 20 years, and we hadn't really slowed down the rate of climate change. In fact, we just kept studying it, and people were working on reducing it, and people still are working on reducing it, but the pace of change was not in the atmosphere. It was in us. And so as a part of studying black carbon, one of the things that happens is that heterogeneity matters a lot, right? So with CO2 as a climate change question, you burn fuel, and actually, if you do a good job of burning, most of it turns into CO2 and goes into the atmosphere. That's what you want if you're an engineer, right? But with black carbon and with other species that are process-based, a little tiny bit of the fuel produces most of the emissions. And that differs depending on where you are. So in the United States, we don't have as huge polluters as other parts of the world do. And so you end up with a nice, mostly straight line. But in other parts of the world, there were small fractions that contributed to heterogeneity. And if you weren't careful, you could miss those. And so people do scenarios by looking at cost optimization or competition or big economic relationships, but down at the heterogeneous end, down at the small amount makes a huge part of the emissions, and a lot of it is driven by individual decisions. And those simply were not being captured in a lot of the where is this going. Human decisions, I found, were especially prevalent in the residential sector, what people call the residential sector, what some economists lump in with building sector. So residential is where people live. I've done a lot of cook stove work, and you might not be able to tell here, but this here is an improved cook stove. This here is how people are cooking after the improved cook stove was delivered, and the goats don't care about either one, right? But so what you're seeing here is people chose to continue with their traditional stove after improved stoves were introduced. And that's a personal decision that can be solved with gosh, I don't know, right? Education, people get educated. I don't know. So one of the things I looked at was, what are people using the stove for? Because stoves were being delivered to cook, right? So I worked on emissions, cooking stove emission standards for a long time. Let's make the stoves really good at boiling water. So boiling water comes out about here. You need a little bit of power. You deliver a certain amount of energy. And then what people are actually using the stoves for, this is a log scale. Here's delivered energy. Most of their delivered energy was for space heating, and especially things that they wanted to do to make money. And so we were optimizing down here. This is where it was hurting them financially, and the optimization was of the engineering design was never getting there. So I became interested in how are people using energy, not sector-wide, but what are the things that pivot their decisions. And then this here is a figure of scenarios that many of you may have seen. This is global emissions of CO2. We're kind of all hoping, well, all in this room, that is, hoping that CO2 kind of levels off and goes down, but we know there are lots of ways it can go. And many people, rightly so, worry about what's happening 100 years from now. Because that's where you begin to see things spread apart. That's where you say, whoops, chose the wrong path. And I started being interested in the next 30 years, which in climate terms seems maybe a little limiting, right? Because the worst climate impacts are way out in the far future. But can we even get there, right? Are we getting there now? Is the path that we're setting leading us to something that we're going to like after 100 years? So what will the world experience along the way? Because living here in the next 30, 50 years are not only us, but our kids. And those are the people we know we can influence. Those are approximately the set of technologies. Yeah, anyone who has kids is laughing at me. You can influence other people's kids, and other people will influence your kids. That's the game here, folks, right? Okay. And is the near future preparing us for a far future that we want? Because it's not all about technology. It's about what we're putting down and how we're conducting transitions. And how we conduct transitions is setting us up for being able to conduct transitions in the future. So, even though a lot of my career on black carbon was going to places that were far away and measuring emissions and doing modeling, I decided to come home to the United States because I was also finding that it was really hard to study what was really going on when I was so removed. So in the United States, many of you do not need to see these numbers, but residences are responsible for about 10% of end-use consumption, 20% of primary energy consumption if you attribute all of it. And I'm going to look particularly here at space conditioning because it's one of those big uses that tends to drive a lot of other little uses that come along with them. The current administration might have this, like they might have flipped from like we wanted to bring down fossil and increase the use of electricity, but you know, sometimes two steps forward, one step back. But a typical aggressive goal of the prior administration was 3 to 4% reduction per year. This is what they wanted to do with fossil fuel, 3 to 4% reduction per year. Later in this talk, I'm going to go show you what 3 to 4% reduction in fossil fuel consumption per year looks like by 2050. Just so you can have that as a target. Okay, and so the thing I'm also interested in is that when you go home, most of the decisions you make, I wouldn't call them not rational. There's discussion about how rational people are and how decisions are not rational, but I would say they're made not optimally. And it's not optimally because we're horrible humans. It's not optimally because we're in the middle of life, in addition to everything else. And that's what I really want to look at, because we don't want people to be not in the middle of life, right? We want the things that we have and value to not have to take a back seat to thinking about climate. That's my position. Okay, so I did like a big loop around because I was thinking about changing black carbon, and then it turned out I actually had to think about changing people, because that's where the long-lived stuff is, in people, in their things, in the things we buy, and in attitudes. So I want to talk about this middle thing for a little bit, because many of these scenarios are done with statistical relationships. Whether they've got a lot of names, but they're elasticities, they're input-output models. These are fine ways to do a very high level, like how is the world mostly going to change? And I'm sure there's an economist or two who runs an IAM out there, and we're going to have a discussion that's like, no, that's not, we don't want to make all those assumptions. Yes, there's varying degrees of detail, but for the most part, people are looking for statistical relationships that explain that you can apply to the whole world. right? And every sector. And you need that, or you're not going to have a global scenario. And so then the question is, are they good enough to understand the mechanisms, right? What is really happening? Are they good enough to understand pace? Are they good enough to understand the little fractions that are left behind and the role of things that you have to do, like infrastructure capacity and so on? Are they good enough? And then there's this other end where people do interviews and surveys, and they look at specific people, and if you show those people these very high level scenarios, they're going to say, it doesn't work that way. You forgot this. You forgot that. And so because people live, right? They live and they face things and they find that it's difficult to make decisions, and they're very present to what it takes, right? And so, but then that's just one person, or it's just 10 people. Is that aggregate behavior? Can that really represent the competition for resources that takes place at a high level? Does that change the fact that our whole world is going to change and so on? What one person says, or what a focus group says, or even what a group of 200 surveys says, tends to get dismissed by people who are creating large-scale scenarios. And so guess what? The scenarios mostly are chucking out lived experience. So I'm interested in the middle range, which I think doesn't exist yet. For the most part, I think it doesn't exist yet. And I would be happy to be proven wrong. So please argue with me. I believe that you will be given 15 minutes for arguments at the end of my 45. When and where do these relationships hold? Why do they happen? And what are the limiting factors in the middle range? And it turns out that there's a body of thought that is developed to describe the middle range. I just never get it as a physical scientist. Like, I never got this training. And so I'm just discovering it after, I don't even want to think, 20, 25 years or 30 years, some really long period of time, I discover that I'm completely uneducated. Yay. Okay. So I'm interested in heterogeneity. Also, I put this in my title. I wanted it to come out of my model. It's coming out really, really, really slowly. But so the mitigation, the response, and the impact are all heterogeneous. We know that. We know that climate is going to come out heterogeneous. But specifically, a few actors could be the leaders. They could drive the apparent pace, right? Like diffusion of innovations. You have these leaders, and then you have these laggards. They could be the laggards stuck at the end. They could also, a few actors could be more apparent and more easy to measure. And you could think you understand the world because you measured them. So I'm going to talk about 3 old white men for the middle range, right? Because they're the one who did this writing. Number 1, Robert Merton, sociologist. So these are his words exactly, but I've broken them apart just to talk about them. Middle range theories are intermediate to general theories of social systems, which are too remote from particular classes of social behavior, et cetera, to account for what's observed. So that's your scenarios, right? Somebody already described this, and I think he wrote this like in 1950 or something. So they're intermediate between those general theories and detailed orderly descriptions of particulars that are not generalized at all. This is where we're struggling, right? We have these very general theories, or we have these specific observations, and what's in the middle? Who helps you build the middle? Ray Pawson helps you build the middle. So it turns out the United Kingdom has this whole concept of realist evaluation. Realist, it turns out, is a philosophical training that I was not trained in. And so his key question is, what works for whom and under what circumstances? This is what I want to begin, what I'm beginning to ask, and what I think we should all be asking as we develop visions of the future. And again, this is a body of thought. What works under what circumstances is the context. And I think that is what we have been missing in terms of scenarios. When does it work? How much ground have we covered? And I especially want to bring your attention to the mechanism part of this. What is going on? What is happening here? So how many physical scientists are in the room? No embarrassment? Yeah, that's good, that's good. How many, and trained as a physical scientist. Right, so you know what? Y'all are awesome because you are trained to look for mechanisms. Right, how many social scientists would you consider yourself social scientists? Yeah, you know what? Y'all are awesome because you are trained to look at what's happening. I don't know what you're trained as. I wasn't trained as a social scientist. No, but I find a huge amount of value in learning from how people in social scientists are trained. This is me personally, in getting me out of my physical science box, and yet I find it so valuable that I was trained to look for mechanisms, because I think that is what we are missing when we develop scenarios, is social mechanisms that are partly generalizable, partly in the middle range. Okay, last guy. We can never see truth. This is Roy Bhaskar. His book is super hard to read for me, very, very hard. We can never see truth, but we can observe causal regularities that are produced by generative mechanisms. So get back to this idea of mechanism. You've probably all seen like social science theories, like theory of planned behavior and stuff like that, yeah? And so I think those are searches for mechanism, but they're not all the way there. The things that we need to develop middle range scenarios are, what is the generative mechanism? So if you look at theory of planned, I should have made a slide on theory of planned behavior because so many physical scientists use it because it's so accessible to them. None of the coefficients are ever the same between different situations. And so it's not a mechanism yet. It's a like, hey, look here. Hey, look for self-efficacy, right? That's super important. Okay, sorry, enough philosophy. It took me a long time to search for these. Like, what are we doing wrong with scenarios? And I feel like I'm beginning to get there, but there was no training out there for me as a physical scientist to figure out what we need to do in order to describe the future. All right, which mechanisms should we seek? Let's just say we're looking for the mechanisms that explain why people do what they do. And it's not something like, oh, people are irrational. Or, oh, human behavior, gosh, once we do that, it all goes to heck, right? That's a thing that is a reaction. There are mechanisms that explain what people do. It may not be everybody, it may not be for all time, but there are mechanisms. Okay, this is my belief. Which ones are we looking for? The steps that most limit the rates and the diversity of change. If our question is, how are things going to change? What can we do? What are the interventions? We need to know what steps limit the rates and the diversity of change. All right. So now I'm going to get a little more concrete and talk about decision rules back in what I was talking about at the very beginning, which is I'm looking at residences and I became interested simply in space heating, both in other countries because it's such a huge fraction of the burden, but also in the United States, because a lot of the United States uses natural gas, and that locks us in to fossil fuels. So now I have to do some acknowledgments. I did almost none of this work, or at least I kind of brought it together. So I have colleagues at Yale who worked on a synthetic data set. I have a student who is integrating res stock housing characteristics. I had a postdoc who was doing an agent-based model. Then we have people doing occupant interviews, plugging away, and we have people talking to contractors and telling us real stuff about houses. The early work was funded by NSF. We're now funded by Climate Jobs Institute, so we're looking at workforce questions too. Not going there yet. Here is what I consider minimal decision rules. 3 stages of decisions, which is something that's hard to do, as far as I can tell, in current scenarios. Number 1, activation. You have to decide that this is the decision you're making right now. So in the case of heating systems, do you need or want to alter your heating system? How many of you need or want to alter your heating system right now? Wow. Yeah, that is pretty, like 4 or 5, right? And how many people here? So that's pretty high. It's like 10%. 10%. It's actually really high, right? Because it's about 5% per year. What are my options? How do you know what your options are? So that's screening. When you buy a new car, or when you go to get a pair of jeans, you're not looking at absolutely everything. You're looking at the things that sort of come within your orbit. And then the last one is, what will I choose? So I'm going to talk about the last one first because that's what everybody does, right? All the models are about, oh, I thought I was going to talk about it first. This is not in order. Okay. Everybody does focus pretty much on the last stage. So you can use a discrete choice model like this, get some coefficients, a little bit hard to find, make them up, steal them from somewhere. You can represent the influences that you're comfortable representing. And then you get a probability of choosing different options. Familiar? Ish? Yeah, okay. And what do people use to select their heating system or their car or their pair of jeans? Social norms, cost, you can tweak that with incentives. And that's what a lot of people are doing in scenarios. And then if you're lucky, you have the influence of environmental attitudes and you have a coefficient from a survey, yeah? Okay, this is where people are focusing, to the extent that they're focusing. How do people make a choice? Let me tell you something. I can't even get the coefficient of cost for heat pumps. I mean, I'm sure there are people who have it, and I've seen studies that have it, but I don't think we even know what that is. So for example, social norms, not cost, dominate heating choice. I think I told somebody that I wasn't going to teach you about heat pumps here, but I am going to teach you a little bit. This is a central furnace. In order to have a centrally ducted furnace that produces heat via a heat pump, you need to have ducts installed. Electric baseboard heaters, like that one in the picture way over on the right, are so much cheaper, and they're hardly ever installed in the United States. I mean, you might have them, but they're really not very prevalent. So much cheaper. Why don't people have them? Well, you want to tell me?
I mean, people probably like having central air conditioning, which you can also pass through the ducts instead of having air conditioners in their windows.
Yeah, so AC. But window ACs are really darn cheap too. Why don't people like that?
Compared to heat pumps, these baseboard heats are really inefficient.
Compared to heat pumps, but they were installed when they were, yeah, why?
The best, and you can hide your heating system vents if you don't.
Or even hide things. They don't look good. Well, where is that in my choice function? So also, I mean, you're not wrong, right? All of these things are good points. The thing is that central furnaces are social norm in the United States. When I take this picture of Europe, they're like, what the hell is that? People don't have central furnaces. Now, that's probably a difference in how much air conditioning you need, in part, but it's almost like if you don't have a central furnace in the United States, your home is a lesser being, right? Everybody wants a central furnace. This is a social norm, right? So I put that in the model because I know what the prevalence is, but no way in heck can I predict it. You have to watch people and figure out what they do. So that's, okay, that's one thing. Here's an example with only price response. There's a person who did great work on heat pumps and figured out how to provide a coefficient for that. All I'm going to tell you for the next 5 minutes is like stuff that's hard to do that I didn't do yet, right? Okay, so just get comfortable with that. The prices aren't helping us. Okay, so I'm going to go back and show you how we do this, but I do this house by house. We're doing it for Illinois, so this is 5.4 million homes in Illinois, and the payback times are anywhere between 2 years and 75 years. This is with no incentive, I admit, and this is with current market prices. And so you can tweak both of those to make different heating systems more attractive. And people are doing that in different states. Right now, there are no policies like that yet in Illinois. The payback times, none of them favor heat pumps. None of them. And so I could go back here and say, I want to model a future in which we electrify, and indeed, electrification is way more efficient than baseboard heaters. But look at that. You need to have propane now, that means delivered gas, electricity, baseboard heat, or resistance heat. That's where your best payback is, in electricity. Yeah, because electric's really expensive. And guess what isn't a part of electrification programs in Illinois? Electrically heated homes, because they're already electrified. So, I was, yep.
This depends a lot on the price of electricity.
It does.
So we've done this in China, and we found that electric resistance heaters are not a good choice because they actually use a lot of electricity and therefore inefficient relative to heat pumps. If you subsidize the capital cost of the heat pumps,
Yes.
more competitive.
This is payback switching from having electric resistance heater now.
That's your base case.
That's
It's
because we're doing existing homes.
Most existing homes in Illinois are heated with electric resistance.
Not most. This is, it's only about 10%. This is just showing the range of payback times depending on home efficiency and what they have now. So the fact that this is big and blobby is just that there's a wide range of payback times. Yeah, we can go into that in a minute or later. I want to go back to a little bit of method that underlies this. This is what we're doing. So our colleagues from Yale put together national surveys on a Puma level basis, and then we take those. Pumas is a population block that's about 100,000 people. We take those and we slice them into 3x3 bits, and then we generate a simulated population. So I'm running this with the simulated population. We go through the 3-stage decision model. which I have not showed you the outcome yet, and then we have heterogeneous outcomes. So what I won't show you a lot of is how heterogeneous this can become. But that is what we're doing to get heterogeneity, to try to understand what's in the middle. Okay. So what factors affect the end of life? Or what factors affect the activation? Number one, it's end of life, right? When your heat pump breaks, you need a heat pump. When your furnace breaks, maybe you need a heat pump. More likely, you're in crisis, and so you get whatever's in stock. We also find this comfort question that anybody who is replacing, I want to say anybody, 95%, 99% of people who replace their devices before the end of life are driven by thermal comfort. That's it. I was so uncomfortable, I couldn't stand that thing anymore. Nobody's going, I really was passionate about the climate. It's more like I had to make a change, and then I was passionate about the climate. Anybody who makes a change and goes beyond the crisis mode is thinking about comfort. And why aren't we making this a comfort transition? Right? Because people are into that. People spend a lot of money to be comfortable. Okay, so that activation limitation, and this is modeling on that. This is business as usual. People sticking with their central gas and central electric resistance. And even if you start no new gas in 2025, you still have a big chunk of gas lasting out to 2050. That means you have to go into no new or replacement gas. You not only can't put in a gas furnace, you can't replace a gas furnace with another gas furnace. This will not happen unless you make a no replacement gas policy, because those things are so darn long-lived. There is your 3 to 4% per year that we need to bring it down. Only that brings it down. You can't just rely on a no new gas policy, because these things last for 15, 18 years. This is a single example. Much of our infrastructure lasts 15 years. Cars turn over a little faster. Stuff in your homes, you don't want to think about. 7, 10, 15 years. What's happening now? I think we all know that the policies have kind of backed off. So we're not getting a 2025 start. At best, we're getting a 2030 start, right? There's no incentives right now. And so what does that do? There's where you need to go. You don't start until later. You've locked in more. But what affects the second stage? And I was talking to Dr. Mauser all about her experience installing heat pump, and I'm like, oh, dang, you've got my talk right there, right? Because what we're not talking about is the second stage, where you know what you can do. So you might have end of life, or you might have a comfort trigger, you might get activated, which is where you need to go in order to start thinking about it. And then how do you know what's allowed? How do you know what your choices are? Where do you get your information? From the government. We all get our information from the government. No way. You get your information from your installer, from the person you call. So what we hear from people, and this is Ryan Scott's and Chris Messer's Sarai Benitez's work, what we hear from people is that the installers are the barriers. You won't save any money. I've never done that before. You probably don't want to do that. The very person who should be telling you what your options are is excluding the thing that is the eco-friendly alternative. And so that means people are never getting past this stage. So not only can we barely turn over in time, this is United States, right? United States only. Not only can we barely turn over in time to meet a 2050 goal, and we've delayed it by 5 years, but now the dude who's supposed to be helping you is cutting out your options. And that's classic, right? It's in the workforce. It's in the workforce. We've never installed one of those. So even if you could convince people to join a training program, it will take 3 years to train them. So you're not any longer starting in 2030. You're starting here. So this is what I mean by what are the mechanisms, right? It sounds like a lot of complaints. It sounds like, oh my gosh, it's never going to work. I don't want to be that person who's never going to work. But I do think that if we don't look at the mechanisms that are changing the rate and the diversity of change, we are not going to achieve the ramp that we want, the pace that we want, any of that stuff. So I want to give you now, I want to end up with 6 thoughts that I have after this sort of depressing look at how quickly we can change. So first of all, it takes a long time to change in physical infrastructure. It takes a long time. That is, I don't know if it's okay. We also need time to avoid locking in stuff we're not very good at. And I think everybody or many people can think of things in the past that had unintended consequences, right? We know that happens. And so we need time to avoid locking in bad stuff. Changing attitudes is slow too, and it's not just people's attitudes because those actually can change very quickly. But changing the workforce can be even slower, especially the workforce that's in infrastructure, because they have their own culture, right? There's culture and belief that is effectively baked in. We are not doing ourselves any favors with the level of reliability and persistence that we're showing to policies. People who are conservative, and I don't mean like politically conservative, I mean like, actually I want to eat, so I'm not going to change jobs, right? People who have that kind of conservative are not going to jump to the newest thing. And so the level of reliability that we have shown doesn't invite people to take up new things. This is something that we have to work on, I think. That is a mechanism. The lack of trust in our public commitment and our persistence to public commitment isn't doing us any favors. All right. Number 3, this is slow. This is slow. If you look at where climate needs to go, that's like, oh man, this is so bad. And yet, let me tell you what's the worst thing about that. It's that feeling. It's that feeling that we can't do anything. People love having aspirations. Things that feel impossible are super intimidating. And so one of the things I'm secretly working on is this notion of self-efficacy. That is so important, the belief that you can do something. We need to scratch that and say, dang, we are making progress. Okay, climate action captures small attention, and that's not meant to be a negative. It's an observation. Like, how many of you think about climate when you're at work? Yeah, lots of people. How many of you go home and think about climate while you're making dinner? Yeah. And when you go to the store and you buy something, thinking about climate? Family thinking about climate? Yeah? Good job. Good job. And how many other people are doing that? Right? And it's not like you're so much better than everybody else. Y'all are awesome. And yet, so many of the choices we make, I chose to fly here. Yeah? Even though I think about climate a lot too. And we make these choices where climate becomes a very small part of, like, well, I'm busy. I'm not going to drive. So it's one small goal, one small benefit. Well-being has many facets. People get super motivated by comfort. Do you know how many people watch HGTV or whatever it's called, the home garden TV? If people pay attention to things that are small, but they have to be given a motivation. Okay, so that's my fifth point. Let's make it easy. Let's not play this out like, let's educate people about really hard stuff and then they'll want to do it. Let's make it easy. And so that means bundling the pro-environmental action with other things that are motivating, like comfort. Like, this is a comfort transition. Oh, and by the way, it's good for the climate. I mean, I don't know, if I'm not a marketing person, so that may not be the right thing. But there's a lot of well-being living in here. There's a lot of well-being in how people are perceiving changes to their homes, which in my view is the very final frontier in terms of transition. And finally, this is not a sprint. People make it look like a sprint when they're drawing this line to 2050. This is a marathon. This is a marathon, like, can we live sustainably? And that means if you go out fast, you're going to burn out. It means you need to foster capacity. It means that it's important to be accountable today, but it's even more important to be able to be accountable in the long term. So that's all I have, and thank you all for your work on this topic. Yeah, I can do the question thing, yeah. You were up first, I saw.
1 second.
And you can be second.
Great, so Tami, this is amazing, and I know that, I think a lot of similar issues as well. I'm curious to hear your thought about more from the research process perspective, like how did you come up with this decision rule as the main middle range approach? Because I kind of felt that it seems to me this has a lot to do with asking the social scientists, we're summarizing the social science literature in a way that we want to formalize the theories a little bit more and identify these are the subset of the theory that's most relevant to decision. Yeah. I'm just curious how you approach this distill process or thinking process in a way that is most useful to do that bridge between statistical approach on the left and the lived experience on the right.
Yeah. So, I want to pick out you said a lot. So I want to pick out one thing you said, which could be the wrong thing, but that social science has theories, and so if we talk to enough social scientists, we'll be able to translate something back, is what I got a little bit from what you said. what I'm coming to is that that's not quite true. And so I've done a fair bit of reading in that set of literature, and sometimes it wasn't targeted, right? It wasn't targeted for exactly what we want to do. And so it's not that they're doing it wrong, it's that they haven't had this use case or application case in mind. And so I get back to the thing that helps me the most is the idea of the generative mechanism. First of all, you need a set of social scientists or people skilled in that kind of investigation that is truly looking for a mechanism, right? And not just getting coefficients. What is going on here? What is this about? And then you can start following what's been discovered. And I mean, I have specific examples that I can refer to, but it's to me, it's not as simple as like going and getting theories, which I thought I was going to do, right? Well, I'll just go check, this literature, and then I'll bring back these equations, and it's not like that. It almost hasn't been looked at in this way, even though the tools exist. So you ask me, what's a research approach maybe? I guess so the people that we have that are on our team doing interviews, they're asking questions in a way that isn't leading, and then they're coding, and so they're doing the whole coding thing. But we had to start with the use case already. So they ask people, think about a change in your home. What was your mind space like? Instead of like, what do you think about heat pumps, right? Or what about your heating system? We almost had to even get away from the heating system because it was too leading. So I don't know if that's an example. I want to get to your question.
I thought the middle picture thing was pretty interesting. Given your background looking at like aerosol microphysics and everything, we're talking about like the aerosol microphysics, like what processes are important for informing like, your global climate models, what's the most important things? Do you have like, I guess, any comment on like, from like a physical climate scientist perspective, what would like be an equivalent like middle picture kind of thing?
Yeah, okay, so the question is, do I have any physical, maybe physical analogy of the middle range perhaps? Actually, I do. I think it's probably one reason that I'm comfortable with it. So when I was at the University of Illinois, I worked with a person who was doing particle resolved modeling. And it turns out that makes a little bit of difference to look at particle by particle in how things are condensing and then how much absorption is enhanced. And some of those factors are not important, and some of them are. And so then the student did machine learning to extract out what things were most strongly driving the change in aerosol microphysics. I mean, the other thing I've done, which was kind of in between what I'm doing now and there, was and the aerosol stuff was one of the limiting factors in aerosol emissions is vehicle turnover. So I worked on a freight system, and we sort of downscaled GCAM output by commodity, and then look at what matters. The commodities matter, right? So what you're shipping matters. So you have to do it by commodity. So then that's a question of like that's an indicator or a mechanism, and then we made enough vehicles travel to carry those commodities, if that makes sense. And that's how we did a freight scenario for the United States. So yeah, I've done a lot of stuff trying to get at the middle. I just didn't know that people had words for it before. Yeah. Yes.
Great job, Tami. Good to see you here.
Hi.
Good to hear more about your work. So I guess first I had like a quick point that in seeing your decision structure of the 3 steps, all I could think about was the policy cycle and agenda setting, policy search, and then evaluation. So in developing middle range theory, you might find a lot of crossover in like policy theory, for example. I'd be happy to talk more about that. But I guess the longer question perhaps is about the selection process that you used. I know you said that that's where most of the attention has been. I agree, and coefficients are all over the place. When you went about deriving it for your model, from what I gather, you used Narishima's big national scale data set. Were you able to derive something that seemed to push more towards general knowledge about what drives the selection process, or?
So, yeah, I might have
yeah.
misled you a little
Yeah.
bit there. Yes.
You're saying, do I have coefficients out of it?
Problem, I guess?
Did I fix the problem? No, we didn't. We did not fix the problem. And I think one of the big challenges is how to meld different kinds of information that you get. So what Adam's referring to is this giant data set that I'm springboarding on to create synthetic populations. Can you use that to extract coefficients? And it turns out the answer is not really. They've done, this is Narasimha Rao at Yale and his team. They've done investigation on that, and they have a paper on drivers of selection of heat pumps. And then we were also working with a postdoc in our group who was looking at a longitudinal survey from, I think it was American Housing Survey, where they were looking at the same houses, because you can't get that out of a cross-sectional data set. And even then it's really rough. And so I have a real question about when I see coefficients popping up in a discrete choice model, I'm like, oh really? you have those, do you? Because what people usually have is out of a large data set where they didn't include another thing, so as soon as you throw in another independent variable, it gets weird, right? And okay, so I'm going to do a redirect here, which is totally unfair, but I think that we don't have to get those very exact. Because it's either one way or another, right? It's kind of a flip, like this is limiting, now it's not limiting anymore. And that's kind of where I go with that question. It's like I did a lot to try to extract that cost coefficient, which we could not do from Narasimha's data set. And then it was like, oh, but it's not cheap enough anyway, and the installers aren't telling anybody. So, so what's the point, right? So that's kind of a cop-out there. But I think at least the beginnings of the middle range are like, find what's the limiting thing, try to overcome it, and that might be your policy right there, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know that it's cool. I think it's very unsatisfying.
Well, if there's one more pressing question, I think we have time for one. Otherwise, we're sort of at time right now. And I think Professor Bond is going to be around for a few hours this afternoon, so if anyone wants to talk with her directly, please come up and talk with her now to set up a time. And Tami, thank you so much for coming and giving this very thought-provoking talk on the big challenges between going from those theoretical future emission scenarios to what we actually are going to be able to attain in the real messy world we live in. So,
That was a great summary.
yeah.